In 2019, gender discrimination at the workplace still remains such a hectic problem. So how do we go about solving this? Firstly, talking about it for one. So joining me today on the Heavy Chef Hot Seat are couple Tim and Danielle Withers, and they're here to talk about their experience and how they overcame gender discrimination. I'm very excited to have a couple on the Heavy Chef couch today. This is the first one for me. So welcome Tim and Danny.
Thank you.
Welcome to Heavy Chef. And now I really want to know the story of how you two met.
Oh dear. Well, we used to work together in advertising.
Okay.
And advertising has some pretty raucous parties. So we were already friends, and yeah, you can tell the story.
You want to tell the
You
story?
can tell the story.
Okay, so so Danny caught my eye. She likes to tell everyone that she didn't know who I was.
Long before I knew he existed.
Yeah, she didn't know I existed, but she caught my eye. So we were friends. We kind of chatted a little bit, but nothing much more than that. And then we should I disclose the details? No. It's pretty innocent, but it's basically we went out for just drinks after work one day, a whole group of us, and that was kind of the first time that we sort of party together kind of thing. And everyone else ended up going off somewhere else to continue the evening, and we just sort of went off on our own little mission and went to the 24-hour engine and got a whole bunch of trashy fizzy drinks and chuckles, and
he's skipped over. Basically, there were these pastel de nata, those Portuguese custard tarts, at the bar that we were at, and having had a few drinks, I was stealing them.
Okay.
And because they were for sale, and I was stealing them, and I went to go show him that I had stolen one, and I had it in my mouth, and he bit the other half and kissed me.
Yeah, so I thought that was a perfect opportunity to
And I
kiss
ran away crying. I did.
Yeah, it didn't turn out quite as I planned, but then...
No.
But yeah, so then we basically just spent the sort of rest of the night talking, and then the next couple of days hanging around in town and walking your dogs, who are now my dogs, and that's kind of how it developed.
That's how you met. It's a very colourful story. I'm sure it's going to be a very interesting one for your little baby girl Gia in the future.
We'll edit it.
Yeah, we'll have to edit it a bit.
Congratulations, marriage.
Thank you.
Now, Danny, I'm really interested in just finding out what your perspective is on women in the workplace. I know you have a baby girl, Gia, but that came with a little bit of difficulty, especially in the workplace. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that?
So, when I fell pregnant, I was diagnosed with Hyperemesis Gravidarum. It's a bit of a mouthful, which is essentially excessive vomiting and nausea. It's not anything like morning sickness, and that's where the difficulty comes in, is that people automatically think that it's morning sickness and that you're, exaggerating, embellishing your symptoms, trying to get sympathy, and because it's pregnancy, everyone has an opinion. The facts are that it is actually a life-threatening disease. It's a pregnancy disease. It's very rare. It affects about 0.5 to 2% of all pregnancies. And it rendered me completely incapacitated. I was unable to get out of bed for 9 months. I couldn't work. And even though my job was primarily online, and I had hoped to be accommodated, reasonably accommodated, so that I could work at least from home, I was put on indefinite unpaid leave, which is basically a way to fire someone without firing them. And being a mostly male-driven company, of course there was very little in the way of understanding, and even having female HRs that I was confiding in and female managers that I was confiding in, they didn't support me in any way. And I did try to fight them. I did try to go to the CCMA and stand up for myself and try find, ways to secure my employment. And I got to the point where I was so sick I physically couldn't keep going. And what I stood to win was it didn't make any difference. To keep fighting, I would have won maybe like 1 month's salary or something like that, and it wasn't worth the stress. And I was already in so much pain and agony. And the problem with hyperemesis is that it's not just a physical disease. You become deeply, deeply depressed, and it doesn't just end when your pregnancy ends. There's long-lasting emotional, psychological problems that can continue after that, even physical problems, digestive problems. I mean, not eating for virtually 9 months wreaks havoc on your body. And yeah, it was quite an eye-opening experience to see how something that you can't plan for, something that you can't predict will happen to you, how that was received in the workplace. There was no ways of accommodating me or making me feel more comfortable. Whereas if you have a normal, healthy pregnancy, you are expected to work up until, the time you want to take leave, if you can take maternity leave. But there's no room, it seems, especially in a workplace that has very old-fashioned views, not very progressive views. There's no place for the ambiguity in pregnancy or in any kind of health problem. So yeah, it was a very challenging time, and eventually I was forced out. I had to leave, and so that left us essentially with 18 months, ultimately, of being on a single income, and having to prepare for a new baby on one income, not knowing how I would find work again. No one's going to hire a heavily pregnant woman, especially one who's so sick. So I knew that I would have to wait at least a few months after our baby was born to begin looking for work again. By that stage I would have been more than a year out of the workforce, and it was terrifying. So I knew that I had to do something for myself.
Tim, I know it was also very eye-opening for you because, when something like that happens to your wife, it can't be easy. So familiarizing yourself with just women in the workplace and the different policies that go with that. I mean, how did you wrap your head around that?
So it was pretty shocking to me. For a long time I've managed, moms. I've always had a lot of women on my team, and I've always tried my very best to accommodate the moms in particular who work in my team. And I think that was, particularly shocking to me because of the views I hold, and how sort of accommodating I try to be. And to be honest, yes, there is an element of accommodation, but I've also found that the moms are so efficient and so incisive, and I think in many ways it is actually like a byproduct of being a mother. You have to become better at making decisions than you were before. I think as a dad you also improve, but I really have been impressed by how incisive moms are, and how sort of empathetic they are, like what good perspective they have. So I've never ever had a problem at all with a mom being on my team and her working say 5 hours a day or 4 hours a day, or having her come and go because she needs to take her baby to an appointment or whatever the case is. I trust them completely that they're doing exactly what they need to do and more, especially because they have that responsibility to their child. And I think in some ways work almost becomes like a sanctuary from the chaos you sometimes have at home. So they really appreciate having a job and being surrounded by other adults. So holding those views, and especially working in a place like 2U, which is very progressive. Our talent team goes to great lengths to be inclusive, to be accommodating, to always be fair in its practices, I think was really shocking to me. But I'm kind of in some ways grateful for it, because I've always I think felt like a particular affinity towards women, and I've always held a lot of respect for women, but my respect just grew immeasurably as a result of that, as a result of seeing like what you went through and how you sort of endured, but also just like casting a light on like what women and what moms actually experience and what they have to cope with, and how strong they are. And if that hadn't happened, like my views wouldn't be quite as sort of formed as they are. So there is an element of gratitude in spite of everything.
How important is it for organizations to have policies in place for women, especially women who are mothers, whether they're single parents or women who are pregnant? Because sometimes they're forgotten. How important is it, Tim, just from your perspective, coming from to GetSmarter, to have certain policies in place for mothers and women in particular?
I think it's incredibly important. I think there are a few things that are more important. It's normal, especially as a growing organization, as your workforce matures, that like more and more of your employees are going to be moms and dads. And if you don't have those policies in place, I just think it's incredibly short-sighted. It's a natural occurrence as you grow. And if you don't have those policies in place, then you kind of either sort of, I guess, you fly by wire, and you kind of figure it out as you go, or it's maybe up to the individual line managers to instate their own policies, which for a while I think happened with us, because we had quite well-defined policies, but our talent team was very small. And now that our talent team is a lot bigger and there's a lot more focused attention, there's obviously capacity to like ensure that those policies are followed across the board. Whereas before, I think it was more a case of like talent's always available. If you have something you want to discuss with them, like go to them. Well, now there's like a lot more hands-on attention. But I mean, I think there are a lot of people who might hold different views to those that I hold, not necessarily in the business, because I think most people I work with are pretty enlightened. But I kind of dread to think what would happen, and you're an example of it, when you have someone who is not progressive in their thinking, and doesn't have perspective, and doesn't have insight, and doesn't have empathy, and there isn't a good policy to guide them. So if they go off the path, there's no one to kind of like set them straight.
But I mean, there was a happy ending to this, because you had your healthy baby, and also you created another new baby, which is Calico Ceramics. Yes, can you tell us a little bit more about your startup?
So we actually weren't healthy when we were born. Or when my daughter was born. When I gave birth, we both had septicemia. So she ended up being in the ICU for a month, and I ended up being in ICU as well, in the hospital for a month. After that, the health complications were so severe that I knew I couldn't go back into an office job. I thought that with, hyperemesis, when you give birth, the first thing that I thought of obviously I was ecstatic, was like, it's over. Like, no more vomiting, no more sickness, no more hospital visits, no more weight loss. Like, I can go back to being a normal person, and somehow try and catch up 9 months of, what I'm assuming for other healthy pregnancies is excitement and, happiness. And what I did have instead was, a life-threatening illness followed by another life-threatening illness. And the repercussions of that were that, I didn't know if it was possible, even if I took, I gave myself a sort of self-imposed maternity leave, but even if I was on a maternity leave, I don't know what kind of business would allow for the kind of health requirements that I would need. So I knew I couldn't go back to, certainly not the kind of office that I was in before, and I just didn't have the physical strength to put myself in that position. So I knew that I had to start something else, and I've always been creative, I've always made things, and I started pottery quite a few years ago just as a hobby. And I tried a bunch of different things as well. When I was pregnant and bored out of my mind, I was nesting like crazy, I made a mobile for my daughter, and people kept asking like, where did you get this mobile? I want to buy it. And I said, well, I just made it. So I thought this could be a viable business. And by the time I felt sort of well enough to try and, take a stab at it, and literally, because you're literally stabbing your fingers with a needle over and over, I realized that I didn't love it. And I knew that if I was going to do something on my own, which has always been a dream of mine, to be my own boss, I would need to love it, really, really love it. And I don't know, one day it was just like a lightning bolt of like, well, this isn't working, trying to make this like mobiles not working, but I've always done pottery, so why don't I try to make mobiles out of pottery? And I had made a few mobiles as gifts for other people before, out of pottery, and it just happened naturally, like it just progressed. But by the time that I had really been doing pottery for years, I went back to a pottery studio to like re-hone my skills. And by the time I was ready to launch the company, I was petrified. And I had been ready for quite a while, many months. I think I was ready to go, and I just kept stalling.
You were just focusing on all the little details. Like
I wanted everything to be perfect.
I don't have business cards yet. I don't have a logo.
I didn't have a logo. I was just petrified. And eventually one day, I think out of like sheer frustration and financial terror, Tim just set my profile live and on Instagram, and I think I had
give you an option.
No, it was like a kick in the pants, and I had like an actual adult meltdown, proper temper tantrum. I was terrified, but the response was immediately so overwhelmingly positive, and it just grew and grew from there. Could never have imagined that it would be what it is today.
Your product line has evolved like crazy.
Yeah, which is lovely. And then we converted one of the rooms in our house into a pottery studio.
It was going to be my man cave. That was my man cave.
I took over. And and so like, I have my own space, and I can work from home, and I can see my baby, which is such a privilege. That I'm aware that so many working moms don't get to, and there's like such a guilt feeling for a lot of moms who feel that they're missing so many precious moments with their kids. So I'm so grateful for that. Now I can also honor my own health needs. So if I feel like I'm getting tired, I can rest. If I need to go to an appointment, I make my own hours, so I can go do that. So it's been a wonderful sort of exploration in respecting my own body and myself and my own needs, instead of putting all of that on the back burner in favor of what a business is expecting of me. So it's been wonderful.
What's the one thing you'd advise to, mothers or mothers to be who are in a similar situation to you? They're not feeling too well, or work is just very stressful for them at the moment, but they don't want to pull away because they're just afraid of losing their stable incomes. What advice would you give them?
That's a tough one. I think arm yourself with knowledge. I think know your rights, your employee rights, your rights as a pregnant woman. It's illegal to discriminate against a pregnant woman. And don't be afraid to defend yourself. It's I think if you can, especially for pregnant women, it's hard to imagine if you haven't had a kid before, that mama bear instinct that kicks in. But to try and bring that up a little bit, that instinct to protect. Because if you can protect your little one, you can protect yourself too. And I think also, to just enlighten people and educate and show people, especially men. I mean, I'm very lucky that I am married to a pretty loud and proud feminist.
Amazing.
And there's so few, and I think that's definitely changing. But also I think men are no longer afraid to call themselves feminists, which is wonderful. So yeah, I think that there is going to be a big shift. And also now, especially in terms of hyperemesis in particular, so little was known about it, and more and more studies are being done. They've just recently concluded a study at UCLA that specified a gene that causes it. And none of that can be helped, in the same way as if anyone had any kind of chronic or debilitating disease, why would this be different simply because it's pregnancy? So yeah, I think every company needs to have policies in place. I think men especially, the onus should be on them, I think, to learn how to best empower their female workforce. And women, of course, as they have always done, and especially more so now, are empowering themselves. And yeah, I think just feeling prepared is probably the best bet, because you never know what's going to happen. I mean, I thought our problems would be over when I gave birth, and it just escalated from there. So yeah, I think just being prepared to defend yourself if need be is vital.
Now, Tim, a little bit earlier you mentioned that, as much as this was an eye-opener for you, do you think maybe if this situation hadn't happened, do you think you would have still been a little bit closed-minded to women in the workplace? What are your thoughts on that?
I think inevitably, yeah. Like I mean, it definitely has been a sort of formative experience for me, and I still constantly interrogate myself. I still have a lot of inherent bias, that I have to constantly confront. Like I'm on the diversity and inclusion committee at work, and we have a women and allies network, which I think I'm one of two men, which is both, I think is both, maybe in some ways a little bit disappointing, but it's also exciting because it means that there's huge room for improvement. But I really do believe that the vast majority of men I work with are enlightened and open-minded. I think it just speaks to something maybe men don't think is as important as it is, or
it's
maybe
not on their radar.
Yeah, or they don't feel comfortable volunteering for. And I think I would have been the same had I not been through this. It certainly sort of elevated the importance of those things to me. But I do think that the men I work with outside of that do a lot to, a lot of them manage moms, a lot of them manage women. Some of them are managed by very strong women. I think they do a lot to try and empower women, and I'm very proud of where I work for that reason. But I would hopefully, I would like to see more men on those committees in future. But I mean, I'm far from perfect. I constantly make missteps, and
I hold him accountable.
Yeah, and you hold me accountable, and I find myself, mansplaining, or I'm something I realized recently is, at work I'm responsible for a team of close to 40 people, and a lot of the decisions sort of rest on my shoulders. And you kind of come home after a day doing that, and you're kind of used to being the boss, in a lot of these conversations, and you sort of try and be the boss at home. And that just isn't conducive to a good relationship, because you're not the boss. The household's actually being run by your wife. I know that's a stereotype, but it's just because that's what women naturally do. Women take that on as well as all the other responsibilities, which is incredible. And you kind of strut through the door and you think you're the boss, and you start talking to your wife in the same way that you talk in meetings. Even if you're being sort of respectful in those meetings, there's a way you conduct yourself at work. I know best, or I'm making this decision, or and it just doesn't translate. So I think that's been quite a realization for me. But no, I don't think I would have the same sort of perspectives as I have now had it not been for this. I think and I think a lot of men, if they went through the same thing, would have those perspectives, or if they sort of innately had those perspectives, they would come to the fore. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I loved how you mentioned that you're part of an inclusion and diversity committee at 2U GetSmarter. For organizations who don't have that in place, what would you advise? What is the biggest lesson that they can get from that?
So once again, I think it's such an important initiative. It's such an important thing to try and instate. And if you're going to do it, like, you have to devote enough time and focus to it. It's something that our headquarters in the States takes very, very seriously, which I'm also incredibly proud of. Like, we have a lot of transgender employees. We have really, really good like ethnic representation across our business. Like, all of these groups have their own like allies networks, which is incredible. I think I've never encountered a business. I mean, I'm sure there are several of them, but I've never encountered a business that is as progressive in that regard and takes these things as seriously. And I mean, there's obviously still a lot of room for improvement, but it's just incredibly encouraging. But it needs to be taken really seriously. And I think even now in our sort of like nascent, D&I committee and our nascent like Women and Allies network, and we obviously also have, others for LGBTQ. We've got a network in place for those groups. Like, even in those, like, we need to spend a lot more time on it than we have already. In fact, yesterday we had an emergency with our dog, and I was a bit distracted in a conversation I was having about the D&I committee, because I'm on like the communications committee. And afterwards I apologized because I was like, I wasn't as focused on this as I should have been. Like, even now I'm struggling already to like really focus on it the way I should, because it's so important. Like, and I think it's basically like, if you just try and do it as like a hygiene factor, it's not going to work. There's a hell of a lot of education that I feel needs to take place. So like, I'm very keen to tell my story to other men in our workplace and like hear their points of view, like in a safe space, because I also feel like, I feel like I'm treading very lightly a lot of the time. Like, I'm generally quite vocal, but I sit in these sessions and I don't often say that much because I feel like a lot of what I say might be misconstrued. And there's a natural and understandable sensitivity around all of this. So like, I completely get that. But we need to create a safe space for men to speak up. So men need to feel like, I can make a mistake and that's okay, and like, people will take a step back and assess what I'm saying and try and read between the lines and like help me, help me if I'm not communicating effectively, or if I'm saying things that are ambiguous or that have some kind of bias attached to them. And we need to create that safe space for men, because otherwise men
be vulnerable.
Yeah, like, men won't come forward if they don't feel they can be vulnerable. And like I said, I work with a lot of amazing men, and I think we need to create that space for them. But then on the D&I committee, it's a similar challenge where, like, I mean, I've raised this a few times in that forum that like, I'm a straight white man. Like, I really don't feel like I'm in a position to talk to most of these things. I just want to help. Like, I've said to them repeatedly, like, I just want to be put to use. Like, tell me what to do, because I can't
dictate terms.
I can't dictate terms like that. I'm just falling into like the classic like patriarchal patterns, and I just don't know. Like, I don't have insight. Like, I don't have an understanding. Like, I have a point of view that is fortunately quite fluid. So like, I think that's benefited me if like, I think I'm very principled, but if someone challenges me on something, as you have many times, like, I'm fairly fluid, and like, if what you're saying makes sense, I will change my perspective. And that's basically what I want the other members of the D&I committee to do to me, is like, challenge my perspective, be open, be understanding, like, let me be vulnerable, but ultimately, like, just tell me what to do, because like, I owe it to you as, previously disadvantaged and marginalized groups who still face huge challenges in the workplace, far more in the way of challenges than I generally face. Like, I owe it to you to try and contribute to change. But I kind of can't do it if you don't tell me what to do, because it's not my place to dictate that.
Guys, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank
Such
you.
an insightful conversation. I'm really inspired. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Well, there you have it. You heard it here first from Heavy Chef. To find out more about our learning experiences, simply hop onto www.heavychef.com.